Welcome everyone to the third installment of our Blockchain and Fintech Club Fintech Association series. We are happy to welcome Branson Lee from the Singapore Fintech Association to share with us. Welcome, Branson. And the stage is all yours.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you for inviting me today. Like I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a snapshot of what the fintech scene is like in Singapore. Feel free to stop me at any point of time if you have any questions. Um, Happy to speak to all of you here. Okay, so just maybe just want to understand. Are we all dialing in from different places or? Yes. Okay. Great. Okay. The title today is Development Opportunities and Challenges of Fintech in Singapore. It's actually broken into several parts. So let me just share with you the agenda. So the introduction is about what Singapore Fintech Association is and the role that we play. And after that, I'll go a little bit into the opportunities that we see in Singapore. Obviously, with opportunities, we also see some challenges, and what are those? And finally, we will go through some case studies of startups that have quote unquote made it in Singapore. And we have a conclusion after that. Okay. So a little bit about myself. Basically, I am actually running a startup. In fact, I run a digital securities exchange in Singapore. We recently acquired, we got an approval from MES to be in the sandbox, Fintech Sandbox Express. So if you imagine, the likes of SGX, NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, Deutsche Börse or whatever, we are similar to that, except that we are a private exchange. Okay. My foray into fintech and blockchain started in 2016, where I was actually heading up the Asian arm for a startup. It's a payment startup, and after that, I went on to run my own blockchain startup, and we did an ICO in 2017. Right, that was the peak of the ICO craze. We raised about 10 million US dollars. Obviously in the equivalent of Ether, and then I went on to actually do to run a cryptocurrency exchange and now a digital securities exchange. Okay, so if you have any questions regarding blockchain or digital securities, very happy to take those on as well. Okay, in fact, we are the first exchange in Singapore to be connected to MyInfo. For the non-Singaporeans or residents, this is essentially our digital identity platform. Okay. So a little bit about SFA first, Singapore Fintech Association. Let me just share with you what we do. If it's too long, I will cut it short because, but this is important just to share with you, what we have been doing with the Singapore regulators and so on. So Singapore Fintech Association, who are we? We are a cross-industry non-profit organization, and we have been established to actually, try to, be the conduit between three different parties. Actually, the first is the regulators, right? In Singapore, we call that Monetary Authority of Singapore, and then we have obviously the financial institutions. Right. So the financial institutions would be your regular banks, your insurance companies, and so on and so forth. And finally, the startups. Right. So we sit right in the middle of all these three so-called entities. Okay. So the vision and it's very simple. We want to make sure that Singapore is a leader in fintech innovation and investment. Right. And of course, we help them with talent, access, capital, and market. Okay. So in terms of talent, this is what we have done. We have strategic partnerships with the universities here, polytechnics and ITE. Not yet with INSEAD, hopefully one day. We have job fairs, Fintech Foundation program. So we ran this program for 15 runs. and we take it is actually an 8-week a program. So we go through 7 different so-called topics like AI, design thinking, blockchain, payments, and so on and so forth. And then finally, then they have a 4-week. After that, after the 8-week, they have a 4-week project, right? So that's what we did. We also gave us bursaries and so on and so forth. So this is essentially our partnerships with the different government agencies and industries. We have a lot of partnerships with the different, I guess, fintech associations. Okay, so we sign MOUs with different countries, and the reason why we do that is because the startups in Singapore need an access to the markets, right? So we bring them overseas, and vice versa. The fintech associations overseas, like Copenhagen Fintech, they will then, promote their startups to actually set up base in Singapore. Okay. Any questions so far? All good? Okay. Access to markets, this is what I've said earlier. Sorry, you saying?
Sorry, Branson. I think we can keep the question for the last 10 minutes. So we'll
okay.
11:25 and then we'll do Q&A.
Cool. Give me a cue if I'm spending too long talking about the different things, yeah? Okay. Moving on. So this is something we established as well, the ASEAN FinTech Network. So for those of you who are in Singapore, ASEAN is basically the group of countries around Singapore, of course, including Singapore as well, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, and so on and so forth, right? This is what we have done so far. We provide, we also help startups go on trade missions, okay? And then access to capital, this is important, right? For all startups, essentially, you need funding, right? And even more so in the current environment, right? So obviously, we know COVID-19 has impacted a lot of startups and the runway especially. So there's a lot of help given by MES. So MES actually launched a $125 million support package for FIs and fintech firms. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all the details. Okay. Same thing. There's additional $6 million grant to promote growth and support business sustenance. We also came up with a fintech certification, and in order for them to actually get access to the grant, startups in Singapore basically need to be certified by our association. And then with that certification, they can actually apply for those grants. Okay. This is basically one of the meet the member session, which obviously, like what we are doing, everything is converted online. Okay, same thing. We are promoting a lot more webinars through Zoom. Okay, and we also came up with something, and if you notice on your right-hand side, we have something called the Digital Self-Assessment Framework. Now in Singapore, not sure whether some of you are aware, in Singapore, you obviously when you work with certain financial institutions, Singapore places a lot of emphasis on cybersecurity, right? So if you are a business trying to work with a bank, you need to have submit a report called the technology risk management framework, right? So you need to assess yourself against all these criteria, make sure that you pass those criteria, then you are able to work with these financial institutions. That's number one. The second thing that the startups need to do is to go through something called the OSPA. OSPA is outsourcing guidelines, right? So a lot of startups nowadays, they actually move to the like AWS, Amazon, and so on and so forth. That's fine. But essentially, you again need to assess yourself against this framework. And the third framework that we have in Singapore is actually the cyber hygiene notice. Again, very much so into the cybersecurity space. So because you see, all these frameworks are essentially targeted at very big financial institutions. So it is a very rigorous kind of a report. But for any startups to conform to this is very, very difficult. So what we have done internally is to come up with a very condensed version of this, and we call it the digital self-assessment framework. So we condense OSPA, TRM, as well as cyber hygiene into 3-in-1, and then we call it the digital self-assessment framework. Okay. Yeah, this is access to capital. There's a very famous gaming company in Singapore called Razer. I mean, I'm sure some of us know. So they recently moved into fintech as well. So we actually organized a hackathon with them, and some of the fintech. They also, supported us in terms of some of the funding for startups. Okay. And these are initiatives that we have done, subcommittees that we have, women in fintech, and so on and so forth. And then we also came up with a gala night. The gentleman on the left-hand side is Ravi Menon, which is the managing director for MES. Okay, this guy is me. Okay, so. And then we also work with a lot of different institutions to publish the fintech reports, fintech talent survey, and so on and so forth. Okay. And upcoming, we have in November 3rd and 4th, we are actually coming up with a digital banking symposium. Let me check whether you guys can attend. If you can, I will extend that invitation to all of us here as well. Okay. Yeah, and we also work with BCG, Boston Consulting Group, to look at certain areas, and then we are the report will be launched on that day as well, during the digital banking symposium. Okay, so we have been awarded the Partner of Labour Movement by the Singapore government. Okay, and we were even mentioned by the Minister of Finance in the budget speech in 2019. Okay. So I breezed through what SFA does, and now I'll go into the fintech scene in Singapore, right? Some of these statistics may be outdated, but the spirit of it is still applies, right? So Singapore, I'm sure all of us know, is not a very big country, right? We have about 5 million people. And being a small country, I think we have to be very strategic in terms of what we do. And one of the key things for Singapore is actually being a financial hub, right? So financial sector is actually very, very integral to Singapore's ambition to be a smart nation. And of course, I've mentioned this earlier, access to capital, talent, and market. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about opportunities, right? The opportunities came about because of a few things. The first is very strong government support. Second, gateway to Southeast Asia. Okay, we have a very vibrant startup ecosystem and a well-developed, mature, and financial center. Let me explain each of these points. So in terms of fintech support, I mentioned earlier about the COVID-19 package that MES has announced. These are also some of the stuff that we have been, a slew of all these financial grants. So in fact, $225 million were committed to create this vibrant ecosystem, right, for innovation and so on and so forth. So we have all sorts of projects like decentralized record keeping, in trade financing, cyber risk, data analytics, and so on and so forth. Okay. Of course, we have to mention the Singapore Fintech Festival. Every year we have a Fintech Festival. I'm sure some of us have been there. It's a massive event. Of course, this year it's going to be slightly different. It's going to be online, for obvious reasons, but hopefully we can make it as big as that. But there's one thing that we miss from Singapore Fintech Festival is the food. right? Every year, people say that the food in FinTech Festival is always the highlights. Yeah. Um, when we talk about government support, this is something that I want to share with you. I'm not sure how many of us are aware of Project Ubin. Project Ubin is a, a project that was started back in 2018, I think, if I'm not wrong. There were 5 phases. In fact, recently, MES has completed all 5 phases. We talk about using the distributed ledger tech, which is another form of blockchain, to digitize the Singapore dollar. Okay, so this is the project. Okay, there are different phases. So phase 1 is basically using digital currency, and then phase 2, we actually look at working with different partners, and then there were 3 other phases, but all have been completed. Okay, so in fact, we are as ready as China is, but of course, China is. I'm not sure whether you've heard China is leading the way right now. They have actually distributed some of their CBDC, which is the central bank digital currency. There's also something called the trade financing, and this is in the partnership with IMDA, which is Infocom Media Development Authority, and also GovTech. GovTech is the government technology arm, and what we have done is actually come up with something called the trade financing. And again, this is done on top of blockchain. In fact, the benefits would be reducing the number of fake documents, paper documentation, and so on and so forth. Patents, startups, obviously, some are very innovative. So in order to protect some of the patents, the IPOS office, which is the Intellectual Property Singapore, they have actually come up with a fast track for some of these grants, right? So if you have a patent, you can actually be granted your patent in as short as 6 months, right? Regulations is important. Essentially, in Singapore, we have a very, very, very famous saying, it's not a one size fit all, right? So it depends on what you do. The regulations will apply to that, right? And so in Singapore, there's a saying that we don't regulate based on the shell of the company. For example, if you're a bank, certain countries will tell you, okay, you need to get A, B, C, D licenses, right? But in Singapore, we are regulated based on activity that we do, right? So it's not about the label of your entity, okay? So it's risk-based, not to impede innovation. And this is another very famous line, right? So we need to run alongside innovation, not too fast, because if you are too fast, you're ahead of innovation, then you stifle innovation. But if you're too slow, then there will be chaos in the market, right? Because people will just do whatever they want to do. So the regulations always run alongside innovation. Okay. This is something that I guess some of the regulators have done around the world. Singapore is no different. So the regulatory sandbox was introduced in 2016, and the Sandbox Express was introduced in October 2019, right? I can tell you the experience if you want to know after this, because we are in the Sandbox Express, right? And the response rate has been very, very prompt. Within 21 days, you should be able to receive a response, right? And that's the SLA. Okay. Investors, there are tons of investors. I know INSEAD students are very, very famous for starting a lot of interesting startups. So these are some of the interesting VCs in Singapore. Of course, there are a lot more. Golden Gate Ventures, 500, and so on and so forth. Sequoia. Okay. This is also another portal that we have. Talent. So we work very closely with this WSG and so on and so forth. There's also a entrepreneur pass that's been introduced to fast track some of the foreigners who wants to start up, to do a startup in Singapore. Okay. So there are about 700 startups now within the fintech space. Okay. And of course, there's also a dedicated fintech unit in Singapore for this. Okay. I'm not going to go through this because we've been through this. Okay. The other thing about Singapore is that it's obviously a gateway into Southeast Asia. Okay. Within the 4-hour flight, you can get to any cities in Southeast Asia. Right. That includes Indonesia, which has, I don't know, 270 million people. Right. And then you have Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, and so on and so forth, Vietnam. Right. Again, this is the ASEAN market. So 640 million people, young and growing middle class, right? Especially in Indonesia. And that is actually a very attractive story besides India and China, of course. Growing internet, this is very interesting because there's a story. So a lot of startups in Singapore, they actually eye the Indonesian market, right? And the story is that the Indonesian market is very interesting because they are very mobile centric, right? And they sort of skip the PC era and went straight to mobile. So a lot of Indonesians are on mobile. Okay, so that's interesting for a lot of startups in Singapore. Okay, same thing. Okay, a lot unbanked. We also have a very vibrant startup ecosystem. This one I've talked about it earlier. These are partnerships that we have. Let me just show you another slide, which is more interesting. Yeah. So there's also this Singapore blockchain landscape that we have. So there are a lot of blockchain companies in Singapore, right? This is my company, right? So if you are keen, you can also take a look at some of these companies, maybe take a look at what they're doing, okay? In Singapore, we also have something called the Fintech Hub, which is at 80 Robinson Road. That's where Singapore Fintech Association office is as well, okay? We also have 2 other areas. One is, another one is at 1 North, so Block 79 and Block 71. It used to be, if you look at the green this structure down here, it used to be flatted factories, right? So for some of us who are not Singapore residents, Singapore used to be one of the factory, they have a lot of manufacturing activities back in the 60s and 70s. Of course, labor costs become too expensive. Then then all of the factories moved up. But these are flatted factories now converted to startup areas. Okay. And this is very close to Fusionopolis, Biopolis, and NUS. In fact, INSEAD is here, right? INSEAD is just next to these places, right? Yeah, so we have a slew of different sort of startup funding for startups. So things like matching of every $1 that you raise, some of these funds will actually top up to 30,000 and so on and so forth. Okay. This is another interesting thing about Singapore. Recently, this was just released, I think, a few weeks back. Basically, there are $4 trillion dollars worth of assets under management in Singapore. And the reason why I show you this is because there are a lot more fintech or wealth management happening in Singapore. I guess it depends on how you look at it. Some people say that it's due to Hong Kong. Maybe not, right? Okay, so we have a well-developed, mature financial center. Okay, low tax. I think it's 17% or 18%, if I'm not wrong. And then you can start a business. In fact, you can actually register a company within 2 days, right? And you only need well, the filing is about $18 or $20, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, it's very cheap to start a business here. Okay. Now we come to the next part, which is challenges, right? Obviously, these are some of the obvious points, which is fintech talent, trust in banks, fragmented market, and funding, right? So fintech talent, there's a shortage of quality talent in Singapore, right? In fact, in ASEAN, ASEAN might be slightly better, but in Singapore, it's very difficult to hire a software engineer, right? If you're a coder, a programmer, you are very well sought after, right? Including full stack developers and so on and so forth. Okay. High trust in banks. A lot of the people in ASEAN area, they trust the banks a lot. Okay. And that's an issue for a lot of fintech startups. Okay. Same thing. In Southeast Asia, although we call ASEAN a bloc by itself, ASEAN is not really ASEAN, right? Because they have their own culture, they have their own, I guess, way of doing things, right? So if you compare a Singaporean versus an Indonesian, it's very different, right? I know because I've covered Indonesia for 8 years, and I'm sure Christian can also chime in on this. Indonesians are by far one of the most polite people that I've seen. But in order to work with Indonesians, you need to understand what they do. Because just to give you a very simple example, they will never say no, right? Everything is yes, right? So the issue and the challenges for a lot of startup is when is a yes, right? And I believe the Microsoft CEO previously said that if you want to succeed in Indonesia, you must hear 3 yeses. The first yes is, okay, I see what you're doing. The second yes is, okay, I sort of understand it. And the third yes is yes, I will buy your product, right? So these are some of the things that we talk about. Okay. Funding for fintechs is another issue. So this is something that we are trying to solve as well. That's why we are trying to do a lot more matching, right? So if you're a startup, we have a lot of all these. In fact, MES and SFA has actually come up with something called Deal Friday. So every Friday, we do matching between the VCs and the startups, right? So if you're looking at starting a company, you can actually sign up for that as well. Okay. Success stories, I'll share with you a little bit. These are not all the companies that we have. In fact, some are not very happy that we didn't include them. But nevertheless, it is what it is, right? But this is not the exhaustive list. Okay. So we have Singapore Life. I'm sure some of us have heard of it. Is a very successful local startup. If I'm not wrong, if you Google their name, I think recently they bought over the entire portfolio from Aviva, right? So they bought out the entire portfolio of insurance policies from Aviva in Singapore, and this is fairly successful startup. Okay. CXA is interesting because they are into wellness, and if you have again in the realm of insurance, they tailor certain programs for wellness. Okay. Neum used to be called Instagram, right? So what they do is that they do a cross-border transfer, remittance. right? They got invested in by Vertex Ventures, which is an arm of Temasek, if I'm not wrong. Okay. Transfer to another cross-border digital payments. Okay. MDEC, also another cross-border transactions company as well. Okay, so they actually received Series C, $87 million and so on and so forth. Okay, and invested in by Alibaba and Financial. Of course, the story is not complete without mentioning Grab. Grab, I think we all know this story. They started off being just a ride-hailing kind of startup, but they have actually ventured into fintech. I've not included Razer. Razer is the same story. They are moving into fintech as well. Okay. And I'm coming to the last few slides. So in Singapore, the biggest news so far is actually the digital banking license, right? So these are the contenders. Of course, they combine with different companies to actually bid for the license. So for example, Grab has actually collaborated with Singtel, which is the national carrier here for telco. And then Razer Fintech has combined or collaborated with FWD Insurance, Insignia Ventures, and so on and so forth. AMTD, a very, very big conglomerate in Hong Kong, they've actually combined with SP Group, which is a utilities company here in Singapore, with Xiaomi as well, and Marubeni with another e-commerce player. Okay. And you would also recognize SEA. SEA is very interesting. I'm not sure how many people know this. SEA used to be a very small gaming company, but now they are really, really huge, right? And we also have ByteDance. ByteDance, maybe not all of us know the parent company, but it is the owner of TikTok, right? Which is very, very hot app nowadays amongst the youngsters, right? Okay. And another thing that's happening also is something called payment services license in Singapore. Essentially, this if you are into payments, the seven activities on the left-hand side that you see: account issuance, money transfer, merchant acquisition, e-money, digital or cryptocurrency issuance services, and money changes. All these are regulated activities, right? So you can see what are some of the some of the companies who have actually acquired licenses. Okay, so they have not issued any cryptocurrency exchange license yet. So if you look at number 7 or 6, it's actually 0, right? So this is where the likes of Coinbase from US, Kraken from US, Binance from China, Huobi from China, all of them are vying for a cryptocurrency exchange license. So are we. So these are some of the things that are happening in Singapore. So this is the last slide that I have. Not sure whether you have any questions.
Thank you, Brenton. You're right. It's very informative of everything that's going on. And so we see the digital banking and payment service is the hot sector for now.
Yeah.
And is there any specific companies other than the success stories that you mentioned earlier and Razer that you think are growing very, very fast right now and in the fintech scene?
For me, I would say that the most interesting part about the recent, I guess, is a company called AMTD in Hong Kong, right? They are listed in Hong Kong and the US, if I'm not wrong. But recently they have made a very, very big move in Singapore. So they went on an acquisition path. So they actually acquired many as many as 5 companies in a row.
Wow.
Right? And yeah, so they're trying to form a sort of a fintech play in Singapore, and they also sponsor a lot of events. So AMTD is another company that perhaps is making a lot of waves recently. Besides that, we also see a lot of interesting blockchain companies coming up, right? That is something that is up and coming as well, because in the blockchain space, for the longest time, regulations have been sort of slacking. And now that US SEC as well as the CFTC in the US, now that they started going after all these ICO projects and so on and so forth, a lot of them actually set up base in Singapore, and they are trying to get regulated in Singapore as a base into Southeast Asia or even the rest of the world. Yeah, so that's another so-called major trend that we see in Singapore. But besides that, I think remittance companies as well, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of remittance companies in Singapore. TransferWise is in Singapore. Yeah, Revolut as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Let's go to the chat. There's already a few questions. The first question is actually it's actually quite technical. Any discount for the SFF?
Any discount? I
It's okay.
I think okay. So what I'll do is let me double check on this, and if I can send across an invitation link, I'll do that. We always have I guess special promo codes, but let me double check on that, and I'll send it across. Yeah.
Why? Just like all the businesses in Southeast Asia always got promo code one.
Yes, promo code.
And from Cali, I think this is following up from the digital bank discussion that you've mentioned. Like,
Yeah.
can you elaborate more about the trend? Like, why is it happening now, and how will this change the landscape in Singapore?
Now, the digital banking space is interesting because for the longest time, banking in Singapore has always been restricted to the large banks, right? So people like DBS, OCBC, and UOB. It used to be OUB as well before they got there was a M&A with UOB. But having said that, I think I guess the main driver for this is that banks have been very, very comfortable in their own I guess space, right? They had lots of branches and so on and so forth. And incidentally, branches are one of the most the costliest I guess expense for all banks. So when you see in overseas, I think banks like Atom, Monzo, and if I'm not wrong, number 26 in Germany or something like that, all these neobanks, they are starting to eat into the pie of all these traditional banking, right? If you think about it, banking itself is just two things, right? One is the service, and secondly, it is about the trust, right? And so you can actually technically serve a customer without even having a physical location, right? So that's why there's a big move towards that. And Singapore government has been, I guess, they do not want to be caught, in the situation where, it is still a very, very regulated space, but yet people are not moving fast enough. So this is to give some competition to some of the local banks. But I guess the local banks will still have their own sort of space to play with, because depending on the types of license, digital banking license, if I'm not wrong, taking deposits and all things is fine. But offering commercial loans and even going beyond, private banking and all this, those will still be the mainstay for the traditional banks. Yeah. Hello? Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, I forgot. Apparently I was muted. Thanks for the explanation, Branson. I'm gonna call on Carlos for his question. Carlos, are you there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's very simple. So, given what happened with Wirecard and the authorities, banning them and their payment management providers, do you see any local company that will come and fill in the gap?
Are you saying for payments or?
Yeah, For payments, yeah. Because I mean, I don't know if you have had this, but then I've been around a few times, and then they don't take the cards anymore. They will just refer me to the pay now, or something similar like that. So
I see.
yeah, to fill on that gap, any local company that can do the same thing.
So there is a unified QR code that was recently rolled out. So basically, you can actually scan the QR code and you can pay through the different. It could be Payla, PayNow, or whatever. So everything is unified under one. We call the unified QR code. Of course, the saga from Wirecard still is a little bit of an issue right now. So they're trying to clean up that mess. Of course, there are some companies or even businesses that are affected. So that part is being cleaned up. But by and large, I think Singapore is slightly different from China, right? China, everything is WeChat and QR code, right? And even I heard that there was a joke that the beggars on the street, they also take QR code only. But in Singapore, it's slightly different, right? It takes a while to get that going. But having said that, I think where we see the payment space being disrupted is what these super apps, right? So people like Grab, they're trying to integrate as many things as possible, right? So you have your Grab Food, Grab Transport, and so on and so forth. So a few players are trying to be that, right? So now Razer is going to be in there as well, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So, but by and large, I think the main thing that we see here in Singapore is that we are trying to move away from cash, right? Of course, the hawkers will still take cash. That's where that's a little bit more tricky. But in Singapore, we already have things like Nets, right? Nets has been around for a while, and Nets is actually owned by all the banks, right? And of course, we have Payla and PayNow, which is also another thing that has been introduced by the different banks. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. And last question before we close. Any prediction for the race of the retail and wholesale digital banking license? Is it still on time for 2021?
So you see, the original license is supposed to be announced this year, right? I mean the winners for those digital banking license. Same goes for the payment services license. But I guess there are a lot of applicants, and obviously there are a lot more considerations they're looking at. Of course, when you look at the different names, I think you should be able to see that there's one or two favorites. Shall not name names, but I would presume 2021 will be a very interesting year. I would expect the payment services licenses to be completed, and also the digital banking, the actual virtual banks, so to speak, or digital banks, they will be announced for sure, right? I don't think they will take longer than 2021. Yeah, beyond 2021. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Branson, for your time. Thank you for all the participants, everyone. Let's end the session now. If there's any more question on SFA or want to contact Branson, they can just go to the SFA website, right?
That's right. You can go to, let me see. You can send us an email, hello@singaporefintech.org, or if you want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn, Branson Lee. But recently I heard there's another Branson Lee, so please look for the right one. Yeah, and if you want to write me an email, it's also very easy, bransonlee@gmail.com, one word. Yeah.